Together can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and today we continue to examine matters which affect human beings in Guyana, the quality of life of citizens in Guyana. And we'll be looking at frontier violence, and particularly what I call the western borderlands, the long border between Guyana and Brazil and Venezuela to the west. And this is an area that has been affected by violence from the bandidos. And I am confident that more could be done to protect our citizens and our communities and the regions, the Barima Waini, the Pataro Sipaluni, the Mazuri Kuyuni, and the Rupununi itself, those four border regions, from violence from these bandidos, most of whom are proven to be Venezuelans. Many of us would remember the image of Venezuelan bandits beheading a Guyanese youth, a young man called Ramasindo from the Barima Waini region, Region 1. It caused public outrage when it was seen. But that was not the only execution. It's not the first and it wasn't the last. There are other executions, of course. There was one of David Sewak. The year before, there were executions of Vernon Eudoxie, Cologne Solomon, Samuel Moses. And these would constitute massacre. These would constitute massacres. These are all examples of the violence meted out to Guyanese citizens in the western borderlands. Venezuelan bandits have raided mining camps. They've shot a policeman. They've killed Guyanese citizens. They've fired on army police patrols. They've robbed business places. They just come into the country at will, robbing and shooting and killing people. And this is what is happening in Western Guyana, what many of us would call bush. But to those on the coastline, Western Guyana is not bush. It is made up of three huge regions, region 1, 7, 8, and 9. And the border with Brazil and Venezuela together measures about 2,100 kilometers. And those four regions constitute about 75% of all Guyanese territory, the biggest part of Guyana. But here we have violent crimes. We have armed robberies, banditry, contraband smuggling, trafficking in persons, murder. These are not uncommon. They occur every year, western borderlands. The police cannot respond rapidly because they're not there. And it takes a lot of time and resources to deploy TSU, Tactical Services Unit from Georgetown, from Ivleri, to get to those areas. The policemen located in those regions are not there in sufficient strength. They're just there enough to man the stations, but they cannot deploy, large amounts of policemen to counter the Venezuelan bandidos. And in any event, the distances are just too great. And they can't leave the stations abandoned. My friends, we need to ask ourselves what causes the violence in our borderlands, in our hinterland. And we know very well that, particularly since President Hugo Chavez died, the Venezuelan economy has been a tailspin, and it has created a lot of social problems. Hundreds of thousands of persons have migrated from Venezuela, many of them to Colombia and Brazil, but even Guyana. We have about 36,000 Venezuelan migrants. There are more Venezuelan migrants in Guyana than there are Guyanese-born residents of the Barima Waini region. So we see the situation in Venezuela as being a major contributory factor because people are fleeing, and sometimes these are poor indigenous people fleeing uh, boat by the boatload into Guyana. And on the other hand, we have a government now which is unable or unwilling to maintain a coherent, a consistent, and a comprehensive frontier security policy. And this is happening at a time when uh, human security for our citizens is deteriorating. So on the one hand, we have an aggressive Venezuelan banditry, and on the other hand, we have a relatively passive response by our own administration. To start with, we do have a problem with transnational crime, and the Western borderlands are vulnerable to transnational crime. The borders, in some places, you don't even know where the borders are. Some places, it's just a shallow river. And during the dry season, you can walk across. Well, people rustle castle across the so-called rivers. There's banditry, and there are a lot of bad guys in Brazil and Venezuela. And there's contraband smuggling. Uh, People smuggle guns, people smuggle drugs, people smuggle people across the border. And of course, these are all criminal activities, and people tend to protect these criminal activities with guns. And when innocent people get in the way, they shoot, they kill, believing that they can do so with impunity. Let us look at our response. Law enforcement, well, traditionally, the largest number of police stations is on the coastline. Of course, there's where the greatest population. But here we have three-quarters of our country, 160,000 square kilometers, with only 40 police stations. And many of them are very weakly manned. Um, and they're on demand. They're just not enough policemen to tackle that amount of, land. And as a result of that, the bandits feel they can operate with impunity. Then there's the question of Venezuelan migration. As I said before, not only Venezuelan nationals, but also Guyanese who are descended, who are now Venezuelan, but descended from Guyanese parents. And they are coming over in droves still. And as I said, they outnumber the population of the Barima Waini region, Region 1. Another problem is that many of the Venezuelan migrants are of Warao ethnicity. They're Amerindians of Warao. Of course, we have Waraos in Guyana, but Venezuelans also have Warao. The colonial border divided the Warao people between east and west. But many Guyanese policemen, I don't know if any Guyanese policemen speak Warao. And I know for sure that many of the Venezuelan migrants don't speak English. So you have a situation in which the law enforcement people don't even understand the language of the migrants. And the migrants, of course, don't understand the language of the policemen. And I don't know when the time will come when Guyanese policemen will speak Warao. And certainly, I don't think the Warao people are in a hurry to learn to speak English. And then, of course, you have the big problem of the bandidos. Now, this is not an English lesson, but sindicato is really a union. A sindicato is technically a legitimate union, for example, of workers. What we're talking about in Guyana is bandas. A banda is a gang, and a bandido is a member of a gang, a bandit. So when we speak of syndicatos, it's a bit of a misnomer. I know Guyanese speak loosely about sindicato, but the real name is bandidos. Now, these bandidos are serious people. Some of them belong to megabandas in Venezuela, and these are highly organized criminal gangs, and even the Venezuelan government recognizes them as recognizing the megabandas. And in some areas, the Venezuelan government doesn't even interfere with the megabandas. But the people who come here are bandidos, I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows whether they belong to bigger mega bandas, but they control things in some parts of the borderland. They impose taxes and they have guns and they rule some parts of the borderland. And these bandidos, let me call them bandidos to avoid any confusion, they're not really sindicatos. These bandits, they are menace to Guyanese communities. They ambush travelers, they raid mining camps. At least one person is murdered somewhere in Hinterland on average. And as I mentioned earlier in this program, there was a massacre with several Guyanese, and Ravindra Sewak himself was killed, and the young Armenian boy Ramasindo, he was actually beheaded. Of course, it was a big protest, and then after a month, after a year, we go on to the next murder. People forget Ramasindo. What are we going to do about reducing violence on our borders? My friends, the PPPC administration has been in office for 2.5 years, all of 30 months, and they have not found it fit to appoint an ambassador in Caracas, an ambassador in Brazil. I don't know the reason, but if an ambassador is present, you can get regular, reasoned analysis of what is taking place in the country, and our citizens could get representation. So when Ramasindo is killed, his families could appeal to the Guyana ambassador in Caracas to have an investigation done. Or when Davindra Sewak is killed, his family can appeal to the Guyana ambassador to inquire from the Venezuelan government why our citizens are being killed. But if there's no ambassador, I think our citizens are deprived of representation. And as a result, the Guyanese responses to these murders by the bandidos is, well, there's no response that the Venezuelan government seems to be troubled by. My friends, we need to look at the law enforcement agencies in Guyana, particularly the Guyana Police Force. Well, from the time of Ronald Gadraj, and you know what happened to him. After he left the government, he became a high commissioner in New Delhi. But even while he was Minister of Home Affairs, he was promising an earring for the police force. Well, now that there is a little more money, well, a lot more money than when the coalition was in government, we still have a police force without an earring. And in addition to that, the police do not have sufficient riverboats to compete with the Venezuelans in the main rivers, particularly the Cuyuni River, which forms the border between Guyana and Venezuela. And they don't have sufficient land vehicles, ATVs. And this is in the face of a part of the country where the villages are widely dispersed. There are over 200 Amerindian villages alone, and the police just can't get to them. They cannot protect the whole border of 2,100 kilometers. And there are numerous logging camps, there are mining camps, and of course there's some illegal enterprises. The APNU plus AFC coalition in that 5-year period between 2015 and 2020 did a tremendous amount of groundwork in terms of hinterland security and protecting our borderlands. The biggest initiative was the promulgation of what I call the PARD, the Plan of Action for Regional Development. Each regional chairman was encouraged to draft his own PARD, a Plan of Action for Regional Development. And we did make some, even though some PPP appointed regional chairmen, elected regional chairmen were hesitant. I know some were very cooperative because they saw the benefit of it, and now that the petroleum revenues have been deployed to some extent for regional development. Some of them, I'm sure, will be dusting off their PARDs, but the aim of the PARD was to enhance education and employment opportunities for young boys and girls and also to promote human safety. That is important in a part of the PRD. And something that is often overlooked, the APNU-AFC created four hinterland towns, Bartica, Mabruma, Madia, and Lethem. Now, this is not ornamental. These are important hubs of administration, security, and development. Now, once you have GRE, General Regional Election, you get regional chairman. Four regional chairmen were elected at GRE. And then you have the LGE. In the LGE, we have local government elections. We have the election of mayors. So by this democratic process, we have four regional chairmen, we have four mayors of the capital towns. In addition to that, the APNUFC coalition introduced four police divisions. I think some of you remember when the whole hinterland, everything from Imbotero to Achiwib was one police division, F division. But now we have four divisions. So each chairman could speak to his mayor or the mayor of his capital town, and he could speak to his police divisional commander. That is how the system should work. And as part of the comprehensive APNUAFC plan, we have these four capital towns, and we have a police divisional structure, which is married to the regions, not just people sitting down in Rabbit Walk, Evelyn, but we have policemen who have to live and work in the regions. That's how it should be. So what we have now is a system, a regional system, which could protect the borderlands. The chairman of the region, the mayor of the capital town, the divisional commander, the police divisional commander of the region could all sit together. And we had recommended, again, we don't know what the present administration has done with the recommendation, that there should be a border protection unit similar to the TSU. And you know what the TSU is up to on the coastline. And they don't have time for the bush. They don't have time for the hinterland. They don't have time for the borderlands. We had recommended, and we were on the way to establishing a border protection service so that these people are trained to patrol and protect the border against Venezuelan bandidos. That is where the APNU-AFC was moving. That's the direction that we're moving towards. So we'd have in the borderlands something similar to the TSU, but these people are familiar with the bush, they're familiar with the waterways. So when the bandidos come across, you don't have to send somebody from Evelyn. You don't have to send a platoon of policemen from the Evelyn. You have residents, you have a policeman in the regions responsible to the divisional commander who could be deployed at very short notice. And once you have ATVs, once you have riverboats, and once hopefully you get an ear ring, you'll be able to catch the Venezuelan bandidos before they can make it back to their homeland. Another important aspect of the APNU's frontier policy, which I recommend now, I'm not going back in history, I'm recommending this as a solution to the problem that we have. What we need to have is intelligence committees so that each elected regional chairman could sit with the mayor and the police divisional commander. And the system that we implemented or re-implemented is that there should be RICs, regional intelligence committees, and they should be fed information from the DICs, the district intelligence committees. So the regional chairman would speak to his district officers and subcommittees, and they would feed information to the NIC. A big problem with suppressing banditry on the hinterland and the borderlands is that there is no information, or the information is not processed into intelligence, and it is not usable. So many times Guyanese only learn of an execution murder like Ramasindhu when they read it in the newspapers, in the Kaito News or Village Voice when the morning comes. And that is too late. That is too late. If you have RICs and BICs feeding information to the National Intelligence Committee or to what is now the NISA, which is another creature of the APNU AFC coalition, you can have prompt analysis and people can anticipate the aggression by Venezuelan bandidos. So that is how the system was created, and that is how it should work. And if it was made to work, I think we have fewer problems in the Western borderlands. So we have the makings of a regional security system. We have police stations, but unfortunately, although there are 40 stations in the entire, four regions, they're still undermanned. And even when a PPP MP visited as part of a parliamentary team some years ago, he complained about the state of the police stations and the conditions under which policemen had to live and work. And in addition to all of that, they don't have aviation, they don't have sufficient land transport, they don't have sufficient river transport. Again, when I was in office, I introduced or reintroduced mounted police to Region 9. So police, don't have to wait until they get gasoline or dieseline from the central government. They can get on the horses which eat grass and go and pursue the bandidos. They can patrol down the south. I remind people that the Rupununi is bigger than Costa Rica. So we can't assume that police are always on the patrol, always looking out, always reconnoitering. And we had introduced or reintroduced the elements of the mounted branch there in order to protect our borderlands. And again, I can't say for sure what is being done now because so many things have changed. But the reintroduction of the mounted police was a great help. We also strengthened or reintroduced, it seems every time we get into office, we have to reintroduce these things that were there before. The militia. These are part-time soldiers. These are citizens in uniform. They come out for weekend training. They come out for annual training. So you don't have to pay them all year, but they are there and they're committed to protecting their regions, protecting the border regions. So we strengthened the militia. And again, the militia has been able to function in all four regions to a greater or lesser degree. And I think the present administration would be well advised to continue to mobilize citizens so that they could defend their regions against bandido attacks and they could protect the borderlands. Not least of all, we introduced the Corps of Wardens because sometimes the Venezuelans don't go to collect trees and birds, they go for gold. And the Corps of Wardens was specifically established to visit and inspect the mines, the gold mines and diamond mines, because that is the destination of most of the bandidos. And of course, the Corps of Wardens would also protect the environment and save lives. Hardly a month passes and there's not some fatal cave-in of a mine because of bad mining practices. So the Corps of Wardens, again, was not an ornamental group. It was concerned about the environment. It was concerned about protecting our resources from foreign attacks, particularly the bandidos. It was concerned about order. And some of the hinterland communities could be very disorderly, trafficking in persons, gun running, narco trafficking. And of course, we had to deal with the coronavirus pandemic, which is still plaguing the country. And above all of those initiatives, APNU, AFC reinforced the National Drug Strategy Master Plan. That is to protect the country from the transnational narcotics trade. We do not produce cocaine in Guyana. And we know that the cocaine comes from foreign countries, and much of it comes by aircraft in the borderlands. They don't come into Georgetown, they don't come to Cherry Jagan International Airport or Eugene Corral. They go into the borderlands, and that is where they deposit the cargoes of cocaine. And our national drug strategy master plan was supported by the National Anti-Narcotics Agency, which of course the PPP, completely demolished within a month or so of getting into office. So we have narco trafficking rampant again. In addition to that, and I remind you, almost every program I have to remind you, we had a security sector reform action plan, which was actually being enforced at the time that we left office. And this security sector reform action plan was meant to reform the entire police force, as well as other parts of the security service. So it was not something that is the property of the APNU AFC. It is something that is meant to benefit Guyana. The Guyana police force needs to be reformed. It cannot pretend, and the public cannot pretend, that everything is going well in the police force. I'm not going to go into that now. My concern is with the security of the western borderlands. And I'm confident that you've seen me out there, you've seen me at Whitewater, you've seen me at Barometer, you've seen me at Lethem, looking at the border. And you've seen the British advisor traveling with me, going to these locations and helping to sensitize the residents there to the need to ensure that the borders were secure. That is part of the security sector reform action plan. My friends, what is the way forward? How will we protect citizens? This is what it's all about. We want to protect the safe human lives of our residents in all four regions, of minors, of business persons, of visitors, of tourists. And we would like to refer to or recommend certain executive measures which need to be taken. The most important, I find, is the need for information. We need to enhance information collection in the borderlands. And that is why I urged earlier in this program that we set up the regional intelligence committees, the district intelligence committees, so they can provide timely information to the National Intelligence Committee. You need to get information, and that information doesn't drop from the sky. It comes from the airstrips where the planes are landing. It comes from the villages. It comes from the two shows. It comes from the people who are affected by the Venezuelan bandidos. And that information comes from the bottom and goes up to the district, through the region, to the national level. Second, the infrastructure needs to be improved. I know that since some funds have been made available in our latest budget, but there is a dearth of information and there's a dearth of, I would say, intention to improve the transportation network, the road network in the hinterland. We have to provide routes to get to the borders. We cannot fly every time we want to go to the border. We need to get a proper national road network. And that is where our infrastructure should be heading. I know a lot of persons working on the coastline complain about the potholes. In some places in the hinterland, there are no potholes because there are no roads. So we need to have a transportation network, not only for economic development, but particularly to protect the lives of our residents. So police and law enforcement agencies, the defense force could motor to those destinations. And of course, you need to improve the quality of the police stations and the conditions under which policemen and other law enforcement officers live. If you are to attract families, if you are to encourage policemen to go there with their families and serve for long periods on the hinterland. You cannot treat it as bush. People just go in for a month or two and come back. They must be prepared to live there, and we must build communities. That is part of the infrastructure development plan. There must be investment. There must be investment in aircraft. There must be investment in ATVs. There must be investment in drones, in riverboats, to be able to reconnoiter what is happening over a big area, and also to ensure that our police officers get to the areas where the Venezuelans are attacking, committing these atrocious murders. There is need for innovation also. We have to think outside the box. We can't just do what we were doing back in 2013 or 1993. We need to think ahead. Technology is moving, and the bandidos have the best technology. They have the best intelligence because they're on the ground. They're not going anywhere. And we need to be innovative in terms of providing the law enforcement agencies with the technology and the resources so that they could prevent crime, deter criminals from coming into the country, and save the lives of our citizens like young Ramasindo, who was beheaded there in the Northwest, region number 1. My friend, the borderlands, the western borderlands are not a Wild West. Persons on the coastline must not regard the borderlands as bush. We can suppress frontier violence. We can make the borderlands safe. This country, I am convinced, I've been from top to bottom, from north to south, along the borders and in all of the communities. And I'm convinced that the people there are suffering, and they could be given better protection by a government that cares. We can protect our citizens, our human lives, and the human lives of the residents of those communities from crime, particularly the crimes of the bandidos and by the Venezuelans. Our children must be allowed to grow up in safe communities, secure communities, and neighborhoods. And much more could be done by central government to give our citizens in the 4 hinterland regions the safety that they deserve. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Let us cooperate for the young. Let us cooperate for our land. Let us resolve to fight together. See we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must do his